Brutus was never supposed to be remembered. He was just another nameless slave, bent under the sun, working for a man who thought himself a god. His master whipped him, spat on him, and forced him to live like an animal. But inside Brutus lived something the master could not touch, the quiet fire of dignity. Years of suffering hardened that fire into steel. Every insult carved strength into his soul. Every wound whispered a promise, one day I will not bow. That day came when his master struck him across the face in drunken rage. Brutus's eyes burned. His chains had not just bruised his skin, they had starved his humanity, and in that instant the rebel was born. With his calloused hands, he seized the farm tool and brought it down with fury. His master fell lifeless, skull broken, pride shattered. The silence that followed was heavy. The other slaves stared at him, half afraid, half in awe. Brutus stood taller than he ever had before. He was no longer a slave. He was a man who had chosen dignity even at the cost of his life. He knew he would be hunted, punished, killed, but for one brief moment he was free. And freedom, even for a single breath, was worth everything. When they captured him, Brutus walked with his head high. He was beaten, chained again, and executed, but his death could not kill his story. Among the slaves, he became legend. His name was whispered in secret, carried in prayers, etched into the souls of the oppressed. Brutus had shown them the truth. A man may be chained, but his spirit is never truly owned. And today his story is for us. You may not be in chains of iron, but you may be in chains of fear. You may not be a slave to a master, but you may be a slave to your past, to your pain, to your doubts. Brutus's rebellion is not just history, it is a challenge. There is something unbreakable in the human spirit, a seed that no master, no whip, and no chain can ever fully destroy. That seed is the desire for freedom. For Brutus, a man born into slavery, this truth lived in his heart long before he ever dared to act upon it. From the very first day he could remember, Brutus had known chains. Not only the iron shackles fastened to his wrists and ankles during his younger years, but the invisible ones that weighed heavier than steel, the laws, the rules, and the cruel beliefs that declared him property. He had no say in where he lived, no right to dream, no chance to decide his own destiny, and yet, despite the world insisting he was less than human, something inside him refused to die. The plantation he lived on was vast, stretching over hundreds of acres in the American South. His master was a man of wealth and cruelty, one who measured human beings by how much tobacco or cotton they could harvest in a day. Whippings were common, starvation was used as punishment, and humiliation was the daily language of control. Slaves were taught not to question, not to think, not to hope, but Brutus did. He couldn't stop himself. When other slaves lay down exhausted after 16 hours in the fields, Brutus would look up at the stars. He would whisper to himself that beyond those skies, beyond the reach of his master's power, there had to be something better. He listened to old stories passed down from elder slaves, stories about free men in the North, stories about rebellions long silenced, stories about God watching even in the darkest of nights. And every story, every whisper, every secret prayer watered that seed of freedom inside him. Chains are meant to break the body, but they can never kill the hunger of the soul. Brutus understood this deeply. He endured lashings, yet his will was not broken. He endured hunger, yet his spirit did not starve. He endured humiliation, yet inside he carried dignity no one could steal. The more his master tried to crush him, the stronger his resolve became. What fueled Brutus was not just his own suffering but the sight of others, his mother who grew frail under endless toil, the children born into bondage with no chance at a better life, the friends who were sold like livestock to strangers. Brutus realized that the desire for freedom was not his alone. It lived in the eyes of every slave who dared not speak it aloud. He carried not only his own longing, but theirs as well. There is something dangerous about a man who refuses to surrender inside, even while bound on the outside. Brutus became that danger. He learned how to hide his rage beneath silence, how to bow his head while his mind plotted, how to endure until the right moment would come. The chains on his arms taught him patience. The cruelty he faced every day sharpened his hunger for justice. He understood that freedom is never given, it must be taken, but here lies the deeper lesson for us today. Brutus's story is not just about slavery in history, it is about the chains we all face. They may not be made of iron, but they weigh us down all the same. Some are trapped in toxic relationships, others in poverty, addiction, or fear. Some are chained by the opinions of others, too afraid to live authentically. And yet, like Brutus, every one of us carries inside a seed of freedom, a whisper that says, "This is not all you were made for, you are meant for more." Brutus's life teaches us that chains can limit your movements, but they cannot silence your mind. Chains can bruise your skin, but they cannot strangle your spirit unless you let them. The desire for freedom, once awakened, is unstoppable. It grows stronger the more it is denied. When Brutus finally chose to act, when he lifted the tool that would strike down his master, it was not a moment of madness, but the harvest of years of silent resistance. It was the culmination of every humiliation endured, every scar carried, every hope whispered beneath the stars. His act was dangerous, yes, and it branded him a rebel, but it also made him unforgettable, because his story, like the stories of so many who refused to bow, reminds us of this eternal truth. Chains cannot kill the desire for freedom. And so, when you feel bound in your own life, trapped by circumstance, paralyzed by fear, or crushed by others' expectations, remember Brutus. Remember that no matter what tries to hold you back, your spirit carries something stronger. That seed of freedom is in you too. Protect it, feed it, let it grow until it gives you the courage to act, because freedom is not only about breaking shackles in the past, it is about breaking limitations in the present. Brutus's story is tragic, yes, but it is also inspiring. He reminds us that the human spirit, when set on freedom, cannot be silenced, cannot be chained, and cannot be forgotten. Oppression is one of the cruelest tools used throughout history. It seeks to silence, to crush, to control. It attempts to turn people into shadows of themselves, stripping away dignity, hope, and humanity. But here lies the paradox. The very weight of oppression often awakens the courage it seeks to destroy. When people are pushed into darkness long enough, they discover a fire within that cannot be extinguished. That is the story of humanity, and it is the story of countless individuals like Brutus, whose suffering carved in him a courage far greater than his chains. For Brutus, slavery was not just a condition, it was a battlefield of the soul. From the day he was old enough to lift a basket, he knew the sting of the whip. He knew what it meant to be called property. To be denied the right to speak his truth, to see his mother weep silently at night, and to watch children born into bondage before they could even take their first steps into life. Yet in all of this, oppression gave birth to something unexpected: courage. Courage does not emerge in comfort. It does not thrive in ease or safety. It is born in the moments when life feels unbearable, when injustice suffocates, and when survival seems impossible. Brutus's courage was not given to him. It was forged through pain, shaped by humiliation, and sharpened by years of being treated as less than human. Each lashing across his back was meant to break him, but it only deepened his resolve. Each insult hurled at him was meant to remind him of his place, but instead it reminded him that he deserved more. Each night he lay hungry, he whispered to himself that one day he would feast as a free man, even if it was in death. This is how oppression breeds courage, by forcing a soul to recognize its own strength in the face of constant pressure. Think of history. Every movement toward freedom was born not in luxury, but in suffering. The cries of the oppressed turned into battle songs. The broken became builders. Those chained in silence became voices that thundered across generations. Brutus was part of this lineage, even if he never lived to see himself as a hero. His courage was not polished or celebrated. It was raw, hidden, and dangerous, but it was real. What makes courage so powerful is that it often begins quietly. Brutus did not wake up one morning and decide to risk everything. It started small, refusing to let despair steal his mind, holding on to dignity when treated like an animal, choosing to believe he was more than the laws declared him to be. These small acts of resistance built into a force he could not contain. The truth is, courage is not the absence of fear, it is action in spite of fear. Brutus knew the price of rebellion. He had seen what happened to slaves who dared to run, who dared to fight back, who dared to dream too loudly. They were hunted, tortured, or killed. Yet he also knew the price of silence, a lifetime of chains, a death without honor, a story never told. And so, between fear and freedom, he chose courage. His master, like all oppressors, believed fear would be enough to control men forever. But history proves otherwise. When oppression becomes unbearable, courage becomes inevitable. There is only so much a human heart can endure before it rebels. Brutus was pushed past that limit, and what rose up in him was not just anger but bravery. A bravery that inspired others, whether in whispers during the night or in silent looks exchanged in the fields. And here is where his story reaches beyond the past into our own lives. Many of us face invisible chains, jobs that drain us, relationships that abuse us, societies that silence us, fears that hold us hostage. The oppression may look different, but the effect is the same. It tells us to accept less, to stay small, to bow our heads and never rise. Yet if oppression could not destroy Brutus's courage, then neither can it destroy ours. Your hardship may be the very thing birthing courage inside you. Your tears may be watering the seeds of strength. Your suffering, though painful, may be shaping a bravery you do not yet recognize. Just as gold is refined by fire, so too is courage refined by oppression. Brutus's story is not just about slavery. It is about the universal truth that no amount of control can erase the will to fight for freedom. His courage was the answer to his master's cruelty, proof that no man, no law, and no system could erase the spirit of a human being determined to rise. Oppression breeds courage, always. The more you are pressed down, the more force you have when you rise. The more you are silenced, the louder your voice will echo when it finally breaks free. The more you are denied, the more fiercely you will demand what is rightfully yours. And so, let Brutus's life remind you, whatever oppresses you today, fear, failure, rejection, injustice, does not exist to kill you. It may, in fact, be the very tool that awakens the courage you need to change everything. Do not despise your chains. Let them teach you. Let them sharpen you. Let them show you that you are stronger than you ever believed. Because in the end, courage is not born in the absence of oppression. It is born in the fire of it, and once it is born, nothing, not chains, not fear, not cruelty, can put it to death. Life is often a long journey of small, ordinary days. Most of what we do is routine. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. But hidden in that routine are moments rare and powerful when everything can shift. These are the moments of choice. They come suddenly, sometimes in silence, sometimes in chaos, and though they last only seconds, they carry the weight of destiny. For Brutus, the enslaved man who bore years of pain under his master's cruelty, that moment arrived one evening, and it changed everything. Choice is the most dangerous weapon any oppressed soul possesses. It is what separates humans from chains, from beasts, from hopelessness. You can strip a man of food, shelter, and freedom, but you cannot strip him of the ability to choose. Brutus's master believed he owned his body, his time, his future. But what he could never own was the moment Brutus decided to rise. For years, Brutus endured the unendurable. His back was scarred, his hands hardened, his spirit tested. He saw others broken. He watched rebellion beaten out of men and hope drained from their eyes. And yet, deep inside, he carried a question: when is enough enough? That question grew heavier with every injustice, until the night he finally answered it. It happened not with fanfare, but with silence. The sun had set, the air was heavy, and the household was quiet. His master, drunk on wine and arrogance, had struck him one too many times. The blow was meant to humiliate, to remind Brutus that he was powerless. But instead, it awakened something in him. In that split second, Brutus understood, I may die tonight, but I will not die a slave. That was his moment of choice, not tomorrow, not when the conditions were safer. Not when others were ready. That single instant became the dividing line between bondage and defiance. Brutus reached for the nearest object, a heavy tool, and in one decisive strike he shattered his master's skull. Now, understand this, it was not merely an act of violence, it was an act of choice, a declaration, a cry from deep within that said, I choose my dignity over my fear, I choose my humanity over my chains. I choose freedom, even if it costs me my life. That single decision altered the course of his story forever. This truth stretches far beyond Brutus's life. A moment of choice can redefine everything. We often underestimate the power of one decision, but one choice can break addictions, one choice can leave an abusive relationship, one choice can begin a revolution, one choice can take a dream from the shadows and drag it into the light. Too many people wait for conditions to be perfect before they act. They wait for courage to feel comfortable, for support to be guaranteed, for timing to be just right. But history does not honor the comfortable, it honors the decisive. Courage is not born from perfect conditions. It is born in imperfect moments when the heart whispers, now or never. Brutus had no guarantees. He did not know if others would rise with him. He did not know if freedom would come at sunrise or death would find him before dawn. But he knew that in that one instant, if he remained silent, his soul would die long before his body. So he chose, and that choice made him more powerful than the man who enslaved him. Think about your own life. How many times have you stood at the edge of a choice, paralyzed by fear? Maybe you hesitated to pursue a dream because failure felt too costly. Maybe you stayed quiet in the face of injustice because speaking up felt dangerous. Maybe you delayed breaking free from a toxic situation because comfort felt safer than uncertainty. Yet the truth remains, your future does not change until you choose. The power of a single decision is immeasurable. One yes can lead to opportunity. One no can save you from destruction. One step can open a path that generations after you will walk. A moment of choice does not just change your life, it can ripple through history. That is why Brutus's story still matters. His decision echoes across centuries because it reminds us that freedom is not given, it is chosen. Dignity is not granted, it is claimed. Courage is not inherited, it is decided in moments of fire. What's remarkable is that Brutus was not extraordinary by birth. He was an ordinary man pushed into extraordinary circumstances. His choice did not come because he was fearless, but because fear no longer ruled him. He chose action over paralysis, and that is what made his story unforgettable. You too will face these moments. They may not look like Brutus's. They may not involve life and death, chains and rebellion. But they will come in quieter forms. The decision to forgive, to walk away, to stand up, to take a risk, to begin again. And when they come, remember this one moment of choice can rewrite the rest of your life. Brutus's courage was not in the strike itself, but in the decision that led to it. That is where his power lived, and that is where your power lives too. Not in the endless waiting, but in the moment you decide. So when the weight of life presses on you, when fear whispers that you cannot change, when oppression, be it external or internal, tries to chain you down, remember, you are one choice away from transformation. One choice away from dignity, one choice away from rewriting your story, because in the end, chains may control your body, fear may haunt your mind, and the world may try to silence your voice. But nothing can stop a soul that decides to rise. Freedom is one of the most beautiful words in any language, but it is also one of the costliest. No chain is ever broken without pain. No oppressor ever releases power willingly. No nation, no family, no individual has ever tasted the sweetness of freedom without first swallowing the bitterness of sacrifice. That is the truth that history has taught us, again and again. Brutus knew this truth in his bones. When he raised his hand against his master, he understood there would be no turning back. The strike was not just against one man. It was against a system, an order, an entire world that declared him a slave. And he knew that to break it, he had to risk everything, his safety, his future, his very life. Freedom demanded sacrifice, and Brutus was willing to pay the price. Sacrifice is not comfortable, it never has been. It asks us to lay something precious on the altar of tomorrow. Sometimes it asks for our time, sometimes our security, sometimes our reputation, and sometimes, as in Brutus's case, it demands blood. We love to talk about freedom as if it were easy, as if it were simply about walking away. But freedom is never given, it is taken, and the taking requires courage strong enough to endure loss. Think of every story of liberation, from revolutions to rebellions, from movements that shook empires to single voices that broke silence. It was never achieved without someone stepping forward and saying, "I will give what others are too afraid to give." Brutus could have stayed in his place. He could have swallowed his anger and lived out his years in quiet chains. Many did, but to him a life without freedom was worse than death. He saw that survival without dignity is not truly living. So, when the moment came, he gave up the certainty of breathing another day in exchange for the possibility of living as a free man. That was his sacrifice, and this is the paradox of freedom. It looks like a gift, but it is never free. Someone always pays for it: the soldier who lays down his life on the battlefield, the parent who sacrifices sleep and comfort to give their children a better future, the activist who endures ridicule, prison, or worse to give a voice to the voiceless, the leader who stands against injustice knowing the price may be exile, death, or betrayal. Freedom has always demanded sacrifice because it challenges the status quo. Those in power rarely let go willingly. Chains, once forged, do not unlock themselves. It takes strength to snap them, it takes pain to break them, and it takes the willingness to risk everything to ensure they are never put on again. Brutus's sacrifice was both personal and universal. Personally, he risked execution, torture, and the wrath of an entire system designed to crush rebellion. Universally, he became part of the eternal struggle between oppression and liberation. His act was not just for himself, but for every man who longed to breathe as a human being rather than exist as property. He sacrificed his comfort for a cause greater than himself, and that is what makes sacrifice noble, when it is not just for your own gain but for others. Freedom is sweetest when shared, and the greatest sacrifices are those made not for self-interest but for the generations to come. Think of the sacrifices made throughout history, the men and women who dared to march when the law said they could not, the leaders who stood against empires knowing the cost was their lives, the nameless rebels who chose death over submission. They all understood what Brutus understood, that the soil of freedom is watered with sacrifice. Without it, liberty withers. Now, bring this truth into your own life. Freedom is not only about nations and revolutions, it is about you. If you want the freedom to live authentically, to pursue your dreams, to walk in dignity, you will be called to sacrifice. You may have to sacrifice comfort to build discipline. You may have to sacrifice relationships that chain you to smallness. You may have to sacrifice the security of the known to step into the risk of the unknown. Every dream has a cost, every vision has a price tag, and the bigger the freedom you seek, the greater the sacrifice it demands. That is why so few taste true liberty, because so few are willing to pay what it costs. Brutus's story reminds us that sacrifice is not the end, it is the beginning. By risking everything, he opened the door to possibility. His act was a spark, and sparks do not apologize for the fire they ignite. His willingness to lose what he could not keep gave him a chance to gain what he could never lose: dignity. Ask yourself today, what freedom do I seek, and what am I willing to sacrifice to get it? Do not be fooled. Freedom will test you. It will ask you to give up something precious. It will strip away excuses and demand action. And in that test, your answer will define you. Freedom does not come to the timid. It does not bow to the complacent. It bows only to those willing to sacrifice, and once you have paid the price, once you have endured the loss, the freedom you gain becomes unshakable because you know what it cost you. Brutus's sacrifice was not in vain. His act became more than rebellion, it became a lesson written not just in history but in the human heart, that to break chains you must be willing to bleed, that to claim liberty you must give up something of yourself. That to walk in freedom, you must first walk through fire, and so let us never forget, freedom demands sacrifice. It always has, it always will, and those who are brave enough to pay the price are the ones who change the world. Courage is not simply an act, it is a legacy. It is not a flame that burns out when the moment passes. It is a torch that lights the way for generations to come. When one person dares to stand, others see that it can be done. When one voice dares to speak, silence begins to crack. Courage, once displayed, becomes eternal. Brutus's defiance was not just for himself. It was for every slave who looked at him and whispered, "If he can rise, so can I." His act of courage was a ripple that moved beyond his own life. He struck not only at the chains that bound his wrists, but at the despair that shackled the hearts of countless others. That is the essence of courage. It multiplies. It is contagious. It awakens something sleeping in the souls of those who witness it. When one person refuses to bow, others remember that they too were not created to kneel. Generations are not shaped by comfort. They are shaped by courage. The children of tomorrow will not remember how safe we played it, how quietly we blended in, or how carefully we avoided risk. They will remember the moments when we dared to be bold. When we stood up, when we resisted, when we chose principle over convenience. Brutus's courage became more than rebellion, it became inspiration. It told the oppressed that freedom was not an impossible dream. It told the silent that their voices still mattered. It told future generations that dignity is worth more than survival. Think about it. Every act of courage in history continues to live long after the person is gone. The courage of those who fought for independence echoes in every national anthem sung today. The courage of those who marched for justice is alive in every step taken on free soil. The courage of those who dared to speak truth to power still echoes in the halls of every courtroom, every school, every home. Courage creates a chain reaction. It does not end with the individual, it begins with them. When Brutus lifted his hand against tyranny, he became a symbol. He may not have lived to see the full fruits of his courage, but others did. Others drew strength from his example. Others carried his spirit forward. That is how courage inspires generations, by planting seeds that grow long after the sower is gone. You and I are living on the courage of those who came before us. Their sacrifices, their boldness, their unwillingness to bow created the freedoms we enjoy today. We walk roads paved by their bravery, and in the same way, the generations after us will walk the paths we carve with our courage, or stumble in the darkness of our fear. This is why courage matters, not just for you, but for those watching you. Your children are watching, your community is watching, strangers you will never meet are watching. And when you choose courage over fear, you give them permission to believe that they can do the same. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I will not quit." Sometimes it looks like standing alone. Sometimes it looks like speaking when your voice shakes. Sometimes it looks like refusing to compromise your values when everyone else bends. But whatever form it takes, courage always leaves a mark. Brutus could have remained silent. He could have lived quietly, endured quietly, died quietly. But then his story would have been buried in the dust of anonymity. Instead, his courage ensured that his name would echo across time, not because he lived long, but because he lived boldly, and boldness is remembered. Generations are not inspired by perfection, they are inspired by courage. They do not look to those who never struggled, never stumbled, never bled. They look to those who faced fear, faced doubt, faced impossible odds, and still chose to act. When we act with courage, we write a story bigger than ourselves. That story becomes a roadmap for others. It says, here is the way through. Here is the proof that you can survive. Here is the evidence that the human spirit cannot be crushed. Think of the generations yet unborn, the ones who will never meet you, the ones who will not know your face or your voice. They will inherit your courage, or they will inherit your fear. They will stand taller because you stood tall, or they will shrink smaller because you bowed. This is the responsibility of every human life, to remember that courage is never just about you. It is about all who come after you. The truth is, courage is eternal. Fear dies with the fearful, but courage outlives the courageous. Fear is forgotten, but courage becomes legend. Fear leaves nothing behind, but courage builds monuments in the hearts of men. So ask yourself, what legacy are you leaving? Will future generations tell your story as one of courage, or will your silence be buried and forgotten? Will your children inherit bravery, or will they inherit fear? Brutus reminds us that courage, even in a single moment, can echo for centuries. One act of defiance, one choice to rise, one refusal to bow can inspire people you will never know. And that is the beauty of courage. It multiplies beyond measure. When you live courageously, you are not just changing your life, you are shaping history. You are igniting torches that others will carry. You are speaking words that others will echo. You are planting seeds that others will harvest. Never underestimate the power of your courage. It may feel small in the moment, but to someone else, it is everything. It may feel like a drop in the ocean, but to future generations, it may become the tide that carries them forward. Brutus's courage teaches us that generations are not inspired by those who accept chains, but by those who break them. They are not inspired by those who bow, but by those who stand. They are not inspired by those who live in fear, but by those who act in faith. And so, live with courage, speak with courage, walk with courage. Because your courage is not only for you, it is the inheritance of generations, and long after you are gone, your courage will still be alive, whispering to those who come after, be brave, stand tall. Fear nothing. History has a cruel way of silencing those who resist. It glorifies kings, generals, and wealthy men, while the oppressed, the forgotten rebels, are pushed into the shadows. Brutus, the enslaved man who chose defiance over despair, reminds us of a truth many still need to hear. You are not powerless, even when the world tells you otherwise. To live in chains is not just a physical condition. It is a mental and spiritual weight. For generations, enslaved people were told they were nothing, that they had no say, no rights, and no future. They were reduced to property, their names erased, their voices silenced, and yet men and women like Brutus proved that power is not always found in weapons, armies, or wealth. Sometimes it is found in the courage to say no to injustice, even when the odds are impossible. Brutus did not grow up dreaming of rebellion. Like many, he was born into a world where his humanity was denied. Every day he endured humiliation, violence, and the constant reminder that his life did not belong to him. And yet, somewhere deep within, a fire remained. He knew he could not change the fact that he was enslaved, but he also knew something his master never understood. His soul could not be owned. That is the lesson we must take into our own lives. Life will often place chains on us, not physical ones like Brutus endured, but chains of fear, doubt, poverty, or circumstance. We may be told that we are not good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to rise above. Some people live their whole lives believing those lies, but Brutus shows us that power is not about what you are given, it is about what you claim. When he lifted his hand against his master, it was not just an act of violence. It was an act of declaration. I am a man, I am not property. I will not spend my life bowing to someone who devalues me. In that single moment, Brutus redefined his existence. His master had all the legal power, all the social backing, all the wealth. Yet he was brought down by the very man he thought powerless. That act echoes across history because it shatters the illusion of control. Every system of oppression, whether slavery, tyranny, or corruption, relies on the belief that ordinary people cannot resist. The moment one person stands up, the foundation begins to shake. Brutus may have paid with his life, but his story carries a legacy. When you refuse to accept chains, you inspire others to see their own strength. Think of your own struggles. Maybe you feel stuck in a job where your efforts are unnoticed, in a relationship where your worth is questioned, or in a cycle of poverty that seems unbreakable. These are chains too. They whisper to you that you are powerless, that nothing can change. But if Brutus, stripped of freedom, beaten into submission, surrounded by enemies, could still rise up, what excuse do we have? Your chains might not fall in one day. You might not smash them with one strike, but every step you take toward freedom, every choice to say no to fear and yes to growth, is an act of rebellion against powerlessness. Brutus teaches us that courage is contagious. The slaves who heard of his defiance knew that even though he died, his spirit lived on. They knew that someone, once thought broken, had stood tall for a moment. That spark would not die. And the same is true for us. When you dare to stand up for yourself, you are not just lifting yourself, you are showing others that they can too. Never underestimate the ripple effect of your courage. A child watches a parent leave behind an abusive relationship. A coworker watches someone speak up against injustice at work. A neighbor watches a community member rise out of poverty and give back. Each act of strength plants a seed in someone else's heart. Brutus never wrote his story. Others buried it, perhaps ashamed or fearful of what it represented. But stories like his survive because they speak to something eternal, the truth that no human being is powerless unless they choose to accept it. So ask yourself today, what chains are you living under? Who told you that you are less than you are? And when will you decide that enough is enough? Brutus reminds us that freedom begins with a choice. He may not have toppled the system of slavery in his time, but he cracked it with his courage. And now, in our time, we must do the same with our own battles. Break the chains of negativity, silence, and fear. Refuse to let your circumstances define you. And most importantly, remember this: you may not control everything in your life, but you always control the strength of your spirit. You are not powerless. You never were.